men who want to have a different kind of relationship and a different kind of fatherhood, there's not a model. We're really making it up. So there's this sense that you really are very alone.
Welcome to Love Link, your guide to love and connection in all forms. We're your hosts, Simone Humphrey and Sina Simon. Today, we're excited to welcome Josh Millrod, a therapist specializing in postpartum depression and anxiety in fatherhood. We're excited to dive into this often overlooked topic.
Welcome, Josh, to LoveLink. We're so excited to have you here today.
I'm psyched to be here as well. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about your background, and how you became interested in working with fathers.
So this is a second career for me. I worked in advertising for a very long time before going back to grad school. I worked on a lot of really cool stuff, and it just kind of all ended up ringing hollow no matter how many international awards I was a part of winning. And there came a day where I was like, I just kind of need to rethink this, and I want to do something different. And my whole life I've been very involved in music. So I took this kind of sabbatical from advertising and just kind of did what felt right. And I ended up mostly spending my time playing music and connecting with friends. And I was up late at night once. I swear this is going somewhere. And a friend was asking me, what does it mean to be a musician? And I talked about using music as a tool for giving voice to experiences that didn't have words, and feelings that were bound up, and giving them a way to enter the world. And I had this kind of moment of revelation as I was playing some shows where multiple times in a row people came up to me in tears after we played. And I was like, something's here. And I just posted on Facebook, does anyone know anything about music therapy? And next thing I knew, I was at NYU getting a master's degree and finding myself really moving away from the pure, I'm doing just purely music work to more psychotherapy work. And that all culminated in the early days in my first job, which was at Rikers Island, where I started a mobile recording studio for the adolescents.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and I took the idea in trauma and recovery of the 3-part process of healing, and I adapted the recording process to it. So it was creating these beats that were these safe holding containers, built a sense of kind of mastery. We all did it together. So people were first whoa, this is a thing I never thought was possible, and now I'm doing it. And then the whole idea was this was a container where you could tell your story in a form that was structured and had some predictability to it. And then afterwards, after we recorded them, you had this object that you could share with people, you could send it back home. And it took this experience you had that was kind of haunting or had shaped you in a negative way, and it made something beautiful out of it. Or beautiful is a strong word, but it made something out of it that you could be proud of. And that work really shaped my understanding of how people relate to traumatic events. Until my third time being held hostage by my patients. And then I was like, let me get out of here and do something a little safer than that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rikers has such a reputation for being a very scary place to be as a prisoner, but also working there. Anyway, I know this interview is about fatherhood, but I'm curious just to hear, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it's just, it really held multitudes. There was I would spend days doing this incredible, meaningful work, recorded hundreds of songs with people, and you would juxtapose that with this constant environment of fear, knowing that something could happen. And, the third time you're locked in a room with people who are threatening to hurt you if you don't do exactly what they say, or somebody else doesn't do exactly what they say, you realize like it's impossible to take care of yourself and do that work at the same
Mm.
time.
Which is so painful because they need so much help and support, but the people who can and who can take care of themselves too, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, so one of the things that I can say when I work with these dads who are like, I've never done therapy before, like, oh, I'm going to be really difficult, is I can say to them, like, hey, like, I know what it's like to work with a hostile witness. I'm like not worried about you at all. Like, you can't throw much at me.
Not gonna phase me.
So I had this private practice that was just kind of chugging along. I was working with a lot of adolescents and younger adults on just kind of the normal worried well things, anxiety, depression, mild traumatic events, life transitions. And then we got pregnant, and I was so just excited and pumped, and I did all the stuff you're supposed to do, and I read all the books, and like I took the classes with my wife, and we got the doula, and I met with the doula, and I even got to have this incredible experience of I delivered our son. I got really lucky in that we had a really open-minded doctor slash resident who led the delivery. We actually ended up we switched OBs at like 36 weeks because they told my wife, we think you need an episiotomy and you don't want it. We're the doctors. So we were like, this is not the vibe.
Yeah.
So we got really lucky. And they, like, when it was time, they were like, all right, like they put the big purple gloves on me and I caught him.
Wow.
What a powerful experience.
Yeah, it was one of, like, I'm getting choked up. I think it's one of the most amazing and potent experiences I've ever had. And she needed some medical assistance afterwards. So he was like in the little, I don't even know what it's called, the incubator, whatever it is. And I ended up doing the first skin to skin. And there's this photo of me just kind of like, like I'm just, like, it's just one of the most intense moments of my life for so many reasons. And then the train like went off the track. And the next 6 weeks were a very dark time in my life. And it was just nobody kind of screened me for it. Nobody talked to me about it. They did like a postpartum screening for my wife before we left the hospital. And she was mad that we just had to wait around because they didn't like her scores. And she just said that her scores were because she was Eastern European. And they're not going to just say everything's great. And so we got home and I'm waiting. I'm like, where's this feeling I'm supposed to have? I'm supposed to love this kid. And everyone told me it was like going to be the most incredible thing I had ever felt. And like, I would be like drunk on love. And like, all I felt was this crushing sense that like, if anything happened to this small being, like I would be broken into a million pieces and I would never be okay again. And that was it. That's all I felt. Felt no sense of like, I didn't feel that joy. I didn't feel that closeness. I just felt crushed. And the only person who really even said anything to me about it, other than my wife Lily, we both talked about like, wow, we like really messed up here. Like, we really put ourselves in a tough spot. And our doula was the only person I felt like I could talk to. And I told her like, hey, like, when is this feeling coming? And she actually said to me, like, it's actually really normal the way you're feeling. Just no one talks about it. And after 6 weeks, I remember really vividly, I was holding him sitting in a dark room and it was broad daylight. And my aunt came over and she's like, you should probably just take him outside. And I was like, oh. And I took him to the farmer's market. And it was just like, suddenly I felt like a person again. And I started to kind of see him as a person as well. And I started to do things like listen to music with him and just like lay next to him and we would listen to music. And when it was late at night and I was freaking out and having all kinds of horrible intrusive thoughts, I started going like, hey, like, I hear you. Like, I know you're worried, but this isn't helping right now. You're actually making me feel worse and like making it harder to care for him. And like slowly the thoughts started to quiet down, and it took about 3 months all in all. And I did most of it without help because I didn't really have language. Even as a therapist who'd been doing this for years, I didn't really have language for what was happening to me. And everyone I talked to had told me like, no, you're going to have this totally opposite experience. So I like didn't feel like I could talk to really anyone. And I didn't want to, like, Lily, my wife, was having a hard time too. And I didn't want to be like, hey, like, I'm not doing well. And so I just kind of like muscled my way through. And it became really clear to me that like somebody needs to be a resource in this moment. And there are very few people doing it. Not a single book that I read suggested, I think, for a moment about what was happening to me and what changes I might go through and what my identity might be like on the other side of this and what my relationship might be like and what my day-to-day life might be like, what my purpose would be. Like, nobody asked me any of these questions. Not a single book even suggested I ask these questions. It was mostly like, here's how you take care of someone else.
And not just the baby, right? You're also your wife as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I was really well prepared for that. And the market research strategist in me was like, I need to like find out how prevalent this is among guys who are having their first child. So I actually went on this like kind of quest, and I interviewed friends of friends all over the world who had just had a first child. And so many of the experiences I had from we had a miscarriage early on to having a baby during COVID to all of the feelings and challenges, I realized like how universal so many of them were. Even with guys who actually would say that they had a pretty good time of it. There's like this sense of like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm up in the middle of the night thinking horrible things about this child, and like, I'm not prepared for that. Or like, I suddenly feel like I can't talk to any of my friends anymore because they don't understand the experience I'm having. Or I am really hurting, but my wife had a C-section and I can't bother her. And it's just like all of these experiences of being left out of the care or overwhelmed by the responsibility or underwhelmed by the feeling or having sudden violent thoughts that had never happened before. I realized like how much of this was normal and how much of it never got talked about. And so many of these guys in these interviews I did would break into tears or tell me that they had never told anyone something. And yeah, it just became so crystal clear to me that I had to refocus my work on helping men navigate these transitions and navigate all the challenges of fatherhood.
Wow. There's so much shame. I hear so much shame in the experience of the men that you spoke with, and also it sounds like in your own experience, like, I'm not supposed to have these feelings. You know, there's so much attention on women in that postpartum period, and I think a lot of women who don't have that immediate sense of joy and wanting to care for the child, they feel an enormous amount of shame, but there are support systems for them in place and people are checking in. But so isolating if there's none of that in place, and yet those feelings are still very much present for a lot of men, it sounds like.
And when I did this pivot in my practice, I started, as you do, I started reaching out to all the maternal mental health people throughout the state and in my area. And I talked to somebody who runs like a large maternal mental health group practice. And she was like, male postpartum depression? That's a thing? I didn't know that was possible. And this is a person, I'm not like saying this is a bad person. We don't get taught this. And often the experience doesn't get talked about, or it just kind of gets brushed under the rug and dealt with in weird ways.
So have you come across much research regarding postpartum fatherhood?
Yeah, there's a growing body of literature. I think what's really hard, and all of the research I've read caveats with like men underreport.
Yeah.
So the prevalence I've seen ranges from anywhere from like 9% to 25%.
Yeah.
So like even at the low end, that's insane. 1 in 10 men are really struggling to stick the landing on this.
Right.
And
right.
the symptom list that you see is insane. It's sort of any way a person can react to a large change in their life.
Right.
So it's really not well codified, and it's not well understood, and the prevalence is pretty wide, and that's even with underreported numbers.
Yeah, right. And I'm sure most men struggle to some capacity, whether or not they meet criteria for a psychiatric illness. I would say most, if not all men, struggle to a certain extent with this really challenging transition.
Actually, the majority of my practice is not new fathers or expectant fathers. I really wish it were, because it's so much easier to nip it in the bud than deal with. Most of the guys who come to me are like have 2, 3, 4-year-olds and are just finally like, okay, I really need help. I've not been the same since they were born.
Why do you think it's taken them so long to reach out?
Because like we're taught not to feel things. We're taught to like respond to feeling with action. It's funny. It's like I had in my own therapy session today, I was talking to my therapist about something I'm finding challenging. And he was like, oh, I guess, yeah, it's typical. Men think they need to act on these things. And I'm just like, even I'm not sitting with my emotions sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like normally the thought that brings somebody, so there's one of two things that kind of bring somebody who's waited. One is that something has happened that has broken them. And like it's like the shaken up soda bottle that is their nervous system. Finally, the top pops off because of something. And maybe that something is putting their house on the market because they need to buy a newer house because they don't have enough space. Or maybe it's their wife becoming pregnant with a second child. It's like there's something that just like breaks the fragile balance. And then they go like, okay, I'm broken. I need help now. I can't ignore it. Or there's this creeping fear that a lot of men have that like they have like fucked up their kids. And that there's nothing they can do if they don't change, like their kids will be fundamentally broken. Which is, we know, not the truth, but it's really it often becomes that dire before people seek help.
Right, like they really have to reach the edge of what they can tolerate. Yeah. Something else I think about with new fathers is that it can be really difficult in the family unit to feel that they're a part of the family unit. Like I've heard this from friends, new fathers in our friend group, and also from my husband, that there's this feeling of being left out in the beginning because so much is focused on the mother and the baby, and there's this attachment. I mean, physical attachment. The woman is maybe breastfeeding. I mean, it's so primal. And then the father is struggling to figure out, like, what's my role here, and how do I join this unit? And that in itself can be very isolating and lonely.
It's really hard, and often In the people I work with, often what I see is people fill that gap with like overaction. Like, okay, I'm going to like, my wife's going to be up breastfeeding. Well, I'm going to wake up too and change the diaper and then not go back to sleep to make sure she doesn't need anything. And it's like, there's all these ways that at least in the guys I work with, they lean in all these ways that don't actually contribute very much, but just run them down.
Mm.
And actually it doesn't actually fill that hole. But yeah, there's in those early days, babies don't really need a ton from their fathers in like a very practical sense. That doesn't mean that fathers can't add value to their lives. But like, yeah, we don't have the tools to feed them necessarily, and there's just a physical bond that doesn't exist yet. And that can be really troubling, and it can be really lonely. And it also compounds the fact that the relationship with their partner is kind of broken down. So you end up in a situation where who do you actually have a relationship with in the house?
Yeah, you feel really excluded.
Yeah, that was not my experience, but it is an experience I hear about a lot. And it's tough because there's some reality to it. And I think that's partly why all the research shows that men are more likely to experience postpartum symptoms like 3 to 6 months afterward. I think part of that is the setting in of that realization that you just aren't going to have at first that same bond. But also part of it is the building up of pressure until it's like kind of things explode. But yeah, in the beginning, it can be really hard. It can be really lonely. And it also can feel like there's really nowhere to put those feelings.
So, how do you help fathers navigate these particular feelings or issues during this phase?
Yeah, I think it starts with kind of just good therapy in the sense of like most men are not taught how to be with their emotions. Most of the men I work with, even like cool, like feely Brooklyn dads, don't necessarily even know how they're feeling moment to moment. So a lot of the early work is like actually just making space for how you're feeling without having to act on it, without having to change it, without getting overwhelmed, just being able to sit and go like, where are you at right now? And then hear what your body and your mind are telling you and actually just sit with it with another person. And it'd be okay that you're not doing very well, or that you're feeling really angry, or that whatever's coming up, but like actually undoing the whole lifetime of messaging and training that we're not supposed to feel and making space for whatever's coming up. Then I think learning how to like, if there's like more acute symptoms, like a lot of the men I work with have intrusive thoughts about either like they're going to harm their child accidentally or like wanting to, and then kind of actively working through that and going like, okay, can we look at what is happening here from an adaptive standpoint? Like you are so worried about this child and about yourself and about your partner that your body and your mind are looking for any way possible to solve it. And what's really actually happening is it's pulling you out of the very real feelings you're having and into some like weird dark fantasy world. And like, can we come back? Can we reground ourselves here? Can we help calm our nervous system? Can we step away for a moment? Can we ask for help? It all comes back to like learning how to actually see what's going on inside of you, feel it, not get taken over by that feeling, and do something more adaptive, like asking for help, going and like sitting outside and drinking up a cup of coffee by yourself. And I don't know, I feel like this is all coming off like a little like eat, pray, love hand wavy, but it really sometimes is that simple.
And I also hear this importance of helping fathers to resource themselves. I think it's really
Yeah.
hard. Like this example that you provided, if their wife or partner is getting up in the middle of the night to feed their child, and there's this guilt, or they're feeling like they need to be doing more, and so they're running themselves ragged, and actually then during the day not having the capacity to show up in the ways that they really can support their partners, that it's really important that they're also watching their own health for the sake of themselves, but for the sake of the family too. And that feels really basic, but really important.
It's such a physical and visceral process for the birthing person. Like, it just is. And that doesn't negate the other experience. But I think what we've built around a narrative around is that you didn't go through that. So, like, you better not complain, and you better do as much as you can.
And that message can be explicit too from the partners.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. You contributed 5 minutes to this project of having a child.
But in reality, like, I'm working with someone who's they're on their third, and the first two he had a really rough go of it. And the simple act of them coming up with a sleep schedule, and him feeling like he was allowed to ask to sleep a little more so that he could be useful during the waking hours of the day, like, was so transformative to his experience. But you don't realize until you have to do it how much emotion and pain and trauma is bound up in even asking. Like, can we, like, maybe approach this a different way? And most men just feel like they can't even begin that conversation if they even know what they need, because we've just been taught not to. There's so many stories about this, like, mythical, like, asshole guy who just, like, wants to go fishing and watch sports and ignore his family. And it's a little like we have this idea and we're more attuned to it than we are the majority of people who are actually just having a much more nuanced experience than that. But as a result, every guy I know, friend, me, or client, is trying to prove that they're not this mythical, like, Homer Simpson.
Hi, LoveLink listeners. Our group practice, Modern Mind, is located in New York City with offices in Brooklyn and Manhattan, offering in-person and virtual psychotherapy. We provide individual, couples, and group therapy, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in conjunction with a psychiatry prescriber. Therapy is a powerful experience that can transform your life and help you live it to its full potential. We're here to help take you where you want to go. To find out more about our practice, visit www.modernmind.co or email info@modernmind.co to be connected with one of our therapists.
I sometimes think about the period postpartum that I had. I have 2 young children now, and I was pretty stressed out, pretty sleep deprived, pretty angry and resentful at times. And I think because somehow I felt like my pain and my struggle was much larger than my husband's, which I do think it was. But in some ways, I think I gave myself permission to be a little bit mean in ways that I probably shouldn't have, on reflection, like when I reflect on that early period. Like, I wonder if sometimes there is this, like, sense that fathers they should just take anything during that time, like, because the woman is, she's just gone through something really difficult, which is true, but it really minimizes the male experience, and that there's some, I don't know, low level mistreatment that can happen during that period of men.
This is, like, the tough part, because it's really hard to talk about what we're talking about. Because there are so many people who co-opt this kind of conversation in bad faith. And what you're talking about is real. I did not go through a brutal physical process that then taxed my body for the next, I don't know, forever, for the next forever. Like, I did not carry a child inside of me. I did not have the brutal experience of giving birth to a child. I did not lose the autonomy of my body for my wife breastfed for a year. Like I did not lose my bodily autonomy for a year. There is not a comparison here. And I would be an idiot to pretend that there was.
Oh, it's harder for women.
But
like it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Physically.
Except that if a father is going through a severe postpartum depression, it's a very real challenge. And if you have a partner, right, who is ignoring or avoiding or minimizing, it does affect the whole family. And you know, as I was thinking about these questions, and one of them was, you know, how can the female partner support her husband who's going through a postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety? On the one hand, I think that's an important one to ask because they do need the support. On the other, yeah, there was a part of me that was saying, okay, here's another thing that the mom has to deal with. You know, she's breastfeeding her baby, she's getting up in the middle of the night, she's recovering, and then has to take care of another person. And I can imagine how challenging that all is, and delicate it is.
Delicate's the right word. I think the thing that we often lose in these conversations is that there's not a finite amount of difficulty that in the world. Like, two people can have a hard time at the same time and both care for each other. And also both care for a young child. It's just, is that the experience I would hope anyone would have? No. But is that an experience like a lot of people have? Yeah. And I don't think we need to play the suffering game for men to have a right to also suffer.
And they can suffer, each person can suffer and still be a support to the other one at the same time. Like, both things can be true.
And this is why it's so important that men get the support they need professionally, whether it's therapy or whether it's joining a group or whether it's with other fathers. But this is why it should be really a part of the screening process, part of the services that are offered. Like, I so rarely see postpartum father groups, but you know, in every parenting forum, there's plenty of postpartum mother groups, mother meetups. Yeah, it's really hard. And I'm also thinking too for stay-at-home fathers who also are navigating that world, there's just not as much of a space and community for it.
Very true. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to launch a group for new dads, and there's so much interest, and when the rubber hits the road, it's really hard for men to follow through for a lot of reasons. Even the most evolved among us does not have a model for what it looks like to be emotionally open and honest in the way that I think women are acculturated to do. I also think that what it means to be a father is in this constant state of reinvention, but is in this very incredibly unique moment right now. Whereas, like, for better and for worse, the idea of what it means to be a mother we have a lot of history, and there's a lot of expectation built up of like, these are the things a mother does. And I don't think it's good. It's calcified mothers into like a really rough spot often. But for men who want to have a different kind of relationship and a different kind of fatherhood, there's not a model. We're really making it up. So there's this sense that you really are very alone in this weird endeavor, because the one person who is witnessing you all the time, you don't want to bother. And the people around you are also just as confused as you if they're willing to open up about it. And so there's this sense that it's just like, what are we all going to do? Sit around and talk about how awful this is?
Right. And I think about too, and this is a generalization, and all generalizations being false, like men in straight relationships usually use their spouse as their emotional support system. Like, they're typically not as good at making friends as their wife is or their female partner is. I mean, and I'm generalizing, but then they lose that person to a baby temporarily, or because the mother is just feeling overwhelmed herself, and then he's on his own, the father's on his own, and has lost the one person who he's relied on emotionally.
Well, I think the postpartum reaction, like whether it manifests as depression or anxiety, is ultimately like a trauma response to a real loss. You're like kind of bopping along through life, and then suddenly your identity, your relationship, and the context you exist in is all just shifted radically. And it's like some people just really have a hard time, me included, in refinding like the rhythm of life. It's too much at once. Like, you lose that primary relationship. I think there's a psych NP who I talked to recently who was a delivery nurse, and now she's a maternal mental health person, and she always tells the moms, like, you have to date again because you're new people. Like, you're already married, but you have to start dating again because you don't know each other anymore. And there's this real loss of your social support system, your daily rhythm of life, and your self-concept.
How long did it take you to recover after that period?
The first 6 weeks were unbearable. And I'd say the next 6 weeks after that were starting to emerge from something. But at about that kind of 3-month mark, I started to feel like I was starting to find a stride, and I started seeing people again, and I started like going on these like epic long walks with my son strapped to me. And I also got really into physical fitness. I lost like 35 pounds and started doing strength training multiple times a week, and I started running, and all of that I think kind of contributed to like, I'm like a person. I'm a father to Ezra, and I like love him and I take care of him, and it's really hard, like all the time. And I'm going to mess it up sometimes, but it's just like, because it's really impossibly difficult. But that's not the only thing I am, is this like caregiving machine that doesn't even like the thing it's caring for.
And you scheduled time for yourself.
Yeah, good. We were good at scheduling for a little while. We quickly realized that I did not handle loss of sleep very well. And that was like a big contributing factor. And it just became as simple as like, if it's 3:30 and I'm just going to be the person who wakes up, and I'll be up, but I'm going to go to bed really early. And as a result, like I got into this rhythm of waking up really early and going out and running or exercising as long as I knew he was still asleep, and just being on call, but doing the things that like made me me. It's funny. I was joking with my wife the other day. I told her, I was like, I've never told anyone this, but at night before I lay down, I go like, I can't wait to have a cup of coffee in the morning. And I'm like, that's the most dad shit I've ever heard of in my life. It's like, I can't wait to have a cup of coffee in the morning. But like sitting and having a cup of coffee and doing the New York Times crossword puzzle like saved my life, I think.
Yeah. Well, having that moment that's just yours becomes so precious when you have a baby, because it's rare, scarce. It sounds like you really invested in yourself, like cultivated this relationship back with yourself, but also really started to cultivate a relationship with Ezra too, like bonding with him, listening to music, laying with him. I am wondering if you could speak a little bit to, I think, what a common experience is around having a hard time connecting with the baby, like fathers who struggle with attaching to their child initially. And it sounds like even though you had this fear or hopelessness around if you were to lose your baby, but a hard time actually building a relationship. And yeah, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that, or how you help fathers navigate that or talk to them about it.
Yeah. I think it's a part of it is if somebody has a sense of purpose of why they did this, why they made this choice, it's about helping them actually spend time with that purpose, because it gets lost so quickly. When, you've imagined playing with a toddler, but really you have just a creature who needs constant care, and it's confusing and gives no feedback, and the only feedback it gives is negative feedback. It's returning to that sense of like, why am I doing this? And I think a lot of it is recognizing, just like with feelings, that this experience is a temporary one, and you will not have it forever, for good and bad. And helping people the same way I help them just sit with like, oh, you're angry. Like, what does that feel like? How do you notice the anger in your body? If the anger could speak, what would it say? Like, does the anger have a song that would bring us closer to it? The really rough experiences you're having in these early days have their own flavor to them as well. And you just sort of often need someone else to help you step out of it and see it. And then you can see all of these things you're doing that are fathering, and all of the feedback you are getting that you're not realizing. I remember so vividly, I was just sitting and I was laying in bed with Ezra, and he was so small, he couldn't move at all, really. Like, he could move his arms around, but like he couldn't, like, he was not mobile in any way. And we were listening to music, and I noticed, I was like, how did his head get way closer to mine? And then I was like, oh, something's happening here that is really easy to not see if you're not looking. And I got lucky that I helped myself slow down, and music helped me slow down so that I could actually see what was happening, that like we had found a way to move our bodies closer together without realizing it.
That's such a sweet moment.
It really is. It's like, for a little while, that was all I had. So that was
You got to hold on to those precious moments.
But helping men see those is like, that is where the attachment comes. And what's funny is often the reverse is like a really nice tool as well. When my clients are being horrible to themselves, when I ask them to reflect on how they would handle their future grown-up child having the same experience, like how would you guide them through it? It's just like, boom, I know exactly what to say. And then they go like, oh, I should just do that for myself. Like, I actually know how to do this.
Yeah. Right. There's an inner wisdom they have to tap into.
And you get into this really cool feedback loop of like, you're healing your own attachment wounds while you're forming an attachment with somebody.
Yeah. And also just to be able to recognize how wonderful of a father they are. It comes so naturally, actually, what they want to say, how they want to support their kid. And right, to be able to both see that they're a good father and that they can give that to themselves and heal themselves is beautiful.
We're also very lucky that we live in the era of Bluey, because we have in Bandit, Bluey's dad, we have this incredible example of a flawed but wonderful father. And so, like, without fail, whenever I ask, when like we're planning, a dad's they're going out to dinner, and the whole family's going, and he's freaking out because he knows his kid is gonna do this and that and this and that, and he's already like time traveled to like 3 days from our session. I like ask him, like, okay, how do you want to appear in that moment? And without fail, like, I'd say 75% of the time, they're like, oh, I want to be like Bandit. I want to be like Bluey's dad. And then we play out the scene, like how Bluey's dad would handle it. Because there's not that many good father archetypes in popular media. There just really aren't. And even though Bandit's a dog, he's doing us all a great service.
The other thing I was thinking is just the importance of physical intimacy with babies and with kids. Mm-hmm. You know, like how you're talking about being with your son, and you notice you're moving closer, like your heads are closer to each other. Like, I think I get the sense a lot of men are they're not as, you know, they don't give as many hugs, they don't move as close to the kids maybe, I don't know. There's something that feels important about that too.
I think the first part, I couldn't agree more. Is like kids are so physical. I said to someone the other day, I was like, I didn't realize so much of parenting would be dancing. Like I just was not prepared for that. Like I'm not really a big dancer, but yeah, I'm dancing a whole lot these days. Yeah, kids are really physical. You can say I love you, and that doesn't mean as much. It's a difficult concept, but physical touch is so obvious. I have not had the experience that the men I encounter in my life feel any kind of physical barrier between them and their kids. And I would say it's actually probably one of the more nourishing parts of the relationship when they can really tap into it.
Like when there's physical
It's
play and
Yeah.
But that's also older. I think there's all these studies on horseplay or like rough play and how important that is for cognitive development and the way that sort of men engage and bond with their kids. But you can't do that with an infant.
No, you
Like
cannot.
I think there's I mean, of course there's holding them and touching them, but I think for a lot of the fathers that I know, it's almost easier as they get older to know how to connect with them. And I think when they're so little, when they're just these little lumps, it's harder, I think, for dads to know, yeah, how do I connect? How do I engage? Is it just holding? Is it just laying? Is it
Yeah, I think I got lucky in that respect. And in terms of like, I just would throw him in a front pack carrier all the time and walk all over creation with him and like walk to the grocery store, walk around, listen to a book on tape, whatever it was. But like that just felt so natural to me. And I'm trying to reflect now because I haven't had people really bring it to me as a concern. Sorry, I'm looking for it. I agree with you that this is so important, and it's not necessarily obvious how. But I don't know. I think I just look at it like throw on that carrier and get out into the world with your child, and you will feel like a person, and you will feel like a father, and also people will constantly comment on what a great dad you are. I feel really bad for moms because I can't imagine what you have to do to get a compliment when you're out in the wild with a child. Because like, I just need to show up.
Yeah, totally. Right. So, we probably have to wrap up soon because you have to pick up your kid. And this has been so helpful. And there's so many, I think, helpful pieces of information to this. But wondering if you could give any piece of advice, because we like to ask this at the end of our interview, to new fathers, what would that be?
I think I'd like zoom out into before, like there's advice before and there's advice after. I think the advice before is actually spend time I would say as much time as you spend thinking about the birthing process and how to support a new mother, spend that time asking yourself, who do I want to be as a father? What will my life look like when I have a child? And how would I like to show up to the challenge of all the disruption that is coming my way? And find at least one person who is not your partner, who you're like prepping, who's like your on-call person who knows like you're going to say crazy things to them and they might not totally get what you're saying, but will at least be able to hear you. Like you need like it's like buddy system almost. Like you need someone you can call call in the middle of the night if you're freaking out and don't want to wake up your partner or bother her. Like I think that's really, really important. And I think in the postpartum period, try and find ways to live your life with this child. I think a big part of what made it impossible for me and for a lot of the men I talk to is like that I'm sitting in a dark room with a thing that can't do anything. Live your life with a child. I know there's some ways that that's difficult because we live in the modern world and COVID is still going around and we don't want newborns to get exposed to it. But like within reason, like enter the world with this child and be people together. And it will help you see that child as a person, and it will help you remember that you are a person. And that might, in the beginning, only be leaving the house for 15 minutes to go for a walk because you're on that the 3-hour clock or 2-hour clock, I guess, with a real newborn. And if you need help, ask for it. Like, don't wait until things are falling apart. Like, no one is well served by you falling apart and by you pretending you're not falling apart. No one is served by that. That is not the kind of father that your child needs, and it's not the kind of father just about anyone I know wants to be.
That's such great advice.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your personal story throughout. Yeah, it's really helpful for people to hear, I think.
Yeah, one of the cool things about working the way I work and working with dads is that so much of this is like people are saying things to me that they're like, I've never said this to anyone. And I'm like, I can be like, oh, I've done that before. And they're like, really? Like, there's this really intimate act in the kind of therapy I do of like, we can join together in this hard moment. And I'm not some blank projection screen. I'm a person who also had really tough experiences. And I think that if I had known that these things were normal, it would have made them so much better because I wouldn't have felt so alone with them. So it's my pleasure to be open and honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and what a gift to other fathers with your patience. It's so lovely. Yeah. It's so healing. Thank you so much for joining us. And if people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
therapyfordadsny.com or at therapyfordads on Instagram.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.